Okay, so in the last video, if you look in my last video, I talked about the first film, so I'm going to talk about the second one. And no, I'm not going to review the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth because I'm actually not interested in those. So, Saw 2, no. Saw 2, I admit, is not as good as the first Saw. Like, that's a given though. Like, sequels tend to not be as good as the first film, but Saw 2, Saw 2 as a movie, it's not, you can, this is the point a point in the series where you can still kind of see that it's not trying to jump the shark. And what I mean by jump the shark is jump the shark on the torture genre. Like, you can see that they're still trying to make a movie rather than a cash in on the torture porn genre, like that where Saw 3 is. Saw 3 and up. So Saw 2, everyone, I mean, everyone should know the genre, the premise by now. It's a detective who a detective who's kind of burnt out, who's been called out by Jigsaw, the original, I mean the killer, my bad. And he's called out, and they catch him immediately. But it turns out it was Jigsaw's plan to be captured because he's trying to test he's trying to test the main detective, Donnie Wahlberg. There you go. So most of this movie is from two different point of views. You have the point of view of Detective Matthews and the point of view of the people inside the house where the main game is taking place. And the main game is 8 people of like bad backgrounds. They're in a house that's filled with, like, I think they said sarin gas, and if they don't find the cure in time, they'll die one by one. And in order to get an antidote, they have to do a very dangerous task, actually, to get it. However, this is one of my criticisms. The traps don't necessarily have a sort of, they don't kind of have a pattern. Like, I remember there was one trap where, I was thinking, Abi, his trap was that if he pulled the lever, he would be trapped in a furnace and die. But then in another trap, it was the pit of needles, but you wouldn't necessarily die from the needle pit. And then in the third trap, it was the jar. I mean, it was a cubic box, and if you put your hands through, you'll be stuck forever in it. It's like, it doesn't really have a pattern whether these traps are meant to kill or these traps are just meant to maim and keep the participants going. Like, that was one of my main problems. Like, if I was Jigsaw, I wouldn't make a trap for them to die in. I would just make a trap to burn the needles in, because, like, then what's the point of them trying to get the needle if they're just gonna die in the trap? Like, if that makes sense. You know, to keep the game going. So that was one of my criticisms to Saw 2. I'm sorry if I kind of went off topic, but another criticism I have to Saw 2, I guess, would be I guess it would just be like where the story is going with this kind of movie. Like, it kind of stopped being about, I mean, the first film was about the victims, but in this film you see the victim story, but you also see the story of Jigsaw. But I never actually liked that kind of idea where you got to see Jigsaw's history, because it kind of destroys his menacingness as a character, because now you see him as this frail guy who's in a wheelchair. But the irony here is that even though he's in a wheelchair, he can make these amazing deadly traps. But when he goes on his history, it kind of like you are not threatened by this guy. Like, he was a suicidal cancer victim, like, who just, like, when he tried to commit suicide but survived, he decided to spend the rest of his life, you know, changing people's lives. That sounds good and all, but when you give him a motivation to do his crimes, it kind of takes away from his character. Like for example, in the Halloween remakes, they kind of gave Michael Myers a reason for killing people. Like Rob Zombie said, he kills people because he had a bad childhood. Well, whoop-de-doo. Because like it doesn't, it's not good enough. You know what I mean? It's not a good enough reason for for the audience to believe that it's Michael Myers, that this is the Michael Myers who will kill anyone for no absolute reason. Like, I remember the original reason was that he was pure evil. Like, it was so simple, but it was more threatening than he just had a bad childhood. In Saw, he went from a guy who just wanted to change people's lives to believe his doctrine to a guy who committed suicide, but then who tried to commit suicide, but then he failed and decided to teach the people after that. Like, the motivation is not good enough. That's what I mean. And there's all sorts of these are the trap. I mean, the traps and Jigsaw were my two biggest complaints for Saw 2. But on the positive side, okay, now I'm gonna go to the positives. Positively, admittedly, out of the sequels, this is the best of the sequels. Like, I know some people think like maybe Saw 4 or Saw 6 were the best, blah blah blah. But this was the sequel where it wasn't that big of a mess. Because I admit, you have to admit, Saw 3 and up, they were kind of a mess in the story. Like, this is the only sequel where it doesn't actually explain anything from the first film, but rather it's just like after the first film. It doesn't really it barely mentions the first film except the bathroom and Amanda. In Saws 3 through 7, like they try to explain every single bit of what happened before it while having a current story. Like, it got kind of messy when they did this kind of storytelling. So storytelling wise, Saw 2 is the best in the sequels, and also the acting is strong, and I actually do like Tobin Bell, and I actually do like what's her face, the girl who played Amanda, Shawnee Smith. She was actually good as the sidekick, and yeah, I admit the twist was still pretty good. Like, once again, like Saw does have that distinct quality of making a good twist, and I did not see that twist. So overall, that was a good ending. So what am I trying to say then? Like an overall grade, I think I would say Saw 2 is not the best Saw film. That title is still for the first Saw. But as a sequel, it is the best sequel.